Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you my December 2017 reading wrap-up. As you may have heard me discuss in my 2018 reading goals video, I have decided to split up my wrap-up and TBR videos to give myself more time to talk about the books in each of those sections. As this is a new format for me, and because I am hoping to review more books in 2018, I'm still trying to figure out how I want to structure these wrap-up videos. But I think how it's going to work is that I'm going to first discuss all the books that I've not yet mentioned in another video, and then move on to briefly discuss all the books that I have talked about in other videos. Now that that brief amount of housekeeping is out of the way, let's move on to talk about all the books that I read in December. The first book I read in December that I have not yet discussed in any other video is The Attention Merchants, The Epic Scramble to Get Inside Our Heads by Tim Wu. This is a book all about the efforts to capture human attention, and then to use, manipulate, and monetize it by a variety of different entities after it has been captured. The book moves chronologically, beginning with penny papers, or the first publications whose revenue model was based off of placing advertising in the paper rather than charging full price for the paper itself. We then move through the decades, learning about snake oil salesmen, propaganda, ad agencies, and the internet, all with the so-called attention merchant, or someone who benefits from the capturing of human attention at the core. At the beginning, I was really engaged by this book, but I very quickly started to lose interest when the authors started providing huge amounts of what I felt to be very unnecessary detail. I would have much rather learned more about enlistment efforts or about demagogues as attention merchants than about advertising during very specific radio programs. And the sections about the internet went on and on about things that I was already familiar with. It wasn't a bad book, but it dragged, and it, ironically enough, was rather unfocused. 3 stars. The next book I read in December that I would like to talk to you about is The Night Watch by Sarah Waters. This book made my top 10 books of 2017 list, so you may have heard me discuss this book previously, but there were some details about this book that I did save to talk about in this wrap-up. It's become somewhat of a tradition for me to read a Sarah Waters book at the end of the year. I always find myself craving one of her books when it's dark and dreary outside, which is definitely what's happening in Pittsburgh right now. Her books are slower paced, but they are heavy with atmosphere and mood, which is perfect for this time of year. Normally, Sarah Waters sets her books in Victorian England, since that is mainly what she studied for her degree, but in this book, we're in London during and shortly after the conclusion of World War II. We meet a cast of characters in 1947 whose lives are quite different after the war. And we know that their lives are quite different because 2 different times we travel backward in time, once to 1944 and then again to 1941. The structure of this book made it all the more heartbreaking because at the end of the first section, we see how everything turns out for these characters. There's no wishing for a specific ending. You know it all up front. Of course, you want to keep reading because their backstories are so interesting, but there is definitely a fatalistic element to this story. There were quite a few sections in this book that got physically brutal. Granted, 2 out of the 3 sections of this book take place during wartime, so it's not like I didn't expect that. But it's something to be aware of when you go into this book. But overall, it was moving, immersive, and complex. Everything I want out of a good Sarah Waters book. And the last book that I read in December that I have not yet discussed elsewhere is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. I had intended to read this book around this time last year, but I got sidetracked reading other things. I postponed picking it back up again because it struck me as something that I absolutely must read during the winter. And boy, am I glad that I stuck to my guns on that one because this is the perfect winter read. I cannot imagine reading it in any other season. This book takes inspiration from Russian folklore and tells the story of Vasilisa, or Vasya, who lives with her family in a village next to the wilderness. Vasya is highly connected to these woods and to the spirits that inhabit them. But when her father, a widower, brings home a harsh and superstitious new wife from Moscow, and when a very persistent priest comes to the village in order to persuade the residents to give up their pagan practices, the very delicate balance between good and evil is thrown off course. And Vasya, one of only 2 people who is able to see these spirits, is forced to intervene. This was a really entertaining book and reminded me a lot of Uprooted, which is a good thing because I love that book. At first, I was wary of this book, as I am with pretty much all fiction that relates to Russia in any way, because you never really know whether or not the author has a knowledge of Russia or Russian, or if it's someone who thinks, Russia is interesting. I should set my book there. And then does a tiny amount of research and fills in all the gaps with stereotypes. But in Catherine Arden's bio at the back of this book, it says that she studied Russian language at Middlebury, which is a very well-respected school for Russian language studies. And it says that she lived in Russia for a little while. And that definitely comes through in the book. The Russian elements feel authentic and not at all forced, but I just wasn't swept away by this book. It's not that I didn't enjoy this book, because I really did. I ended up giving it 4 stars on Goodreads. But I kept waiting for the moment where I was going to feel all caught up in the story, and that moment never came. I don't know if it was the book just not impressing me enough, or if it was the fact that I had just reread The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book is not only magical, but is one of my all-time favorites, so it's a tough act to follow. I really enjoyed rereading this book. I did fall in love with it all over again, but I do have to say that it was a different experience the second time around. I discussed my experience rereading this book, as well as the agonies and the ecstasies involved in rereading our favorite books in general in a separate video, and I will link that down below if you'd like to watch. Also in the month of December, I read 2 additional nonfiction books, the first of those being Cork Dork, a wine-fueled adventure among the obsessive sommeliers, big bottle hunters, and the rogue scientist who taught me to live for taste by Bianca Bosker. In this book, journalist Bianca Bosker struggles to achieve her very lofty ambition of becoming a certified sommelier or wine expert in only a year's time. And I also read How to Listen to Jazz by Ted Gioia, which is a beginner's guide to listening to, understanding, and appreciating jazz music. I loved both of these books. I gave them both 5 stars, and I did a dual review of them where I discussed them both in depth, and I will link that video down below. So those were all the books that I read in the last month of 2017. If you would like to see what I am currently reading, or what's on my TBR for January of 2018, I posted that video earlier this week, and I will leave a link to it in the description box below if you would like to watch. If you have thoughts on any of these books, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And if you would like to chat with me any other place besides YouTube, the links to all of my social media profiles are linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great start to your new year, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.